Hi, Dorji Sun, Project Manager for Perlin.net. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had a few exits and started many tech startups, and the last 10 years actually I've been spending in environmental work. So was working in carbon credits. We raised over $400 million to protect rainforests. So coming back from that work, we saw a huge need, especially when you look at the energy consumption of Bitcoin, to find a useful way to use that power. On top of that, we looked at all of the proof of work that was being developed, and we genuinely found that proof of work takes all of this compute power that could be used for research, various types of protein folding, big data, machine learning, and it was being used for kind of useless puzzles. So Perlin was the idea that could you actually underpin a network whilst also creating an income generation opportunity for people who owned unutilized devices. Prior to Perlin.net, I was the COO of Santiment. Santiment is a decision support for crypto investors. Other than that, I'm an advisor to quite a few different crypto projects, everything from Republic Protocol, Loki, Network, Quadrant, Airblock, and a few others. And the team is a really talented team. So on the technical side, we've got our CTO, Kenta. Kenta is a university medal winner from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and worked at NAVA and also in AI and robotics. And we've also got Jack, who's a PhD from Georgia Tech in distributed systems. We've got Doug, who formerly was a developer at Amazon, and we've got He Young and a bunch of others. And then on the business side, we've got Anup Malani, who's a professor from the University of Chicago in economics, Mirza Udin, who's a phenomenal guy out of a hedge fund, and a bunch of other really talented guys like Trung in community and Darren in legals and corporate compliance. Perlin is a high throughput scalable DAG, and our first vertical deployment for the DAG is to create a global distributed marketplace for compute availability and compute power. So when you look at the choices between proof of work and proof of stake, we saw that having a proof of stake, but also then having this proof of compute availability was the way that we could build out this liquid marketplace for compute power. So in the end, when we analyzed proof of work, we saw this huge centralization. You've got guys like Bitmain, you've got guys like Roger Ver, Jihan Wu, who have dominated mining. It's very centralized. On top of that, when you look at proof of work, we call it proof of waste, because actually there's this huge amount of energy, like more than all the nations in the world, barring 33 nations. You've got all of this compute that's being utilized just to do mindless hashes like SHA-256. And what we looked at then for proof of stake was that it was more efficient, it was faster. Avalanche was a really sexy name that came out, and we were the first team to deploy that in the wild. So we actually built off Avalanche's consensus protocol. And where we landed was, we call it proof of wisdom. It's the question of whether or not we could take all of this compute resource and all of this money and interest in crypto and then sandwich them together. So when we look at what we're trying to achieve with Perlin, we're trying to build a more equitable income distribution, more equitable distribution of token rewards. And then on top of that, we're looking at a proof of stake, which is fast and efficient, scalable, high throughput DAG, but then also building it out in a liquid compute marketplace. So a supercomputer is a computer with the ability to take huge amounts of data, complex algorithms, machine learning, and then parallelize it to make the computation faster. So a supercomputer is largely used for really complex calculations, algorithms, folding protein, genomic sequencing. You can also use it for large data sets such as predictive maintenance in oil refineries or climate change modeling. And it's growing abundantly. So actually, if you look at the CTO from OpenAI, which is Elon Musk's consortium, they actually calculated that every 3.5 months, the demand from a compute perspective for this AI is doubling. So compare that to Moore's law, which is doubling every 18 months. It is a far greater rate of growth. So what makes Perlin so amazing is that we truly believe it's going to be a crossover token. We're hugely confident that when you actually look at the ability for general compute, beyond just the supercomputing, you'll be able to basically run, whether it's a web server, whether it's just general AI machine learning models, you can do anything because we're essentially creating the container for you to, like a Linux instance, for you to do anything you want. So why this is so powerful is we're already talking to dozens of companies about redirecting their current server requirements onto Perlin. Another example is basically any single cryptocurrency project that's currently using AWS or Ali Cloud or Google Cloud. It seems a bit hypocritical to be selling a decentralized future while relying on a centralized server. So we absolutely think all of them should be thinking about joining Perlin. We've already spoken to a huge number of the big companies, everyone from Foxconn or Total, which is the biggest company in France. We've spoken to Exxon and Shell. They do predictive maintenance, so they use huge amounts of compute, but they can now run that on the Perlin network. We've spoken to Amgen, one of the big pharmaceutical researchers. They can also run their pharmaceutical research on a distributed network. So we really see the future of Perlin being far more than just a supercompute. That's obviously very sexy for R&D, but we actually think that we are bringing on a whole new generation of users to farm flops. The simple analogy that we use is the Airbnb of underutilized compute, or the Uber. So we're bringing on stream a whole new generation of underutilized devices. So in this space, it is the holy grail. So the idea of taking all the underutilized compute. To talk philosophically, absolutely believe that the American dream is dead. I think that the idea that you can get a job and work your way out of poverty into middle classdom, I think that's really escaping us because most of the jobs are, very low hourly wage. People have to commute a very far distance, and to afford housing in some of the key cities is very difficult. So we, on our team, do believe that technology is the true lubricant for social mobility. So what does that mean? That means that crypto and passive incomes and other ways of turning lazy devices that are currently not utilized into revenue generation is the future. So when we look at the opportunity for people who are using Perlin, we really see, you look around the house, you're going to have a smart TV, you're going to have a smartphone, you're going to have a PC, maybe several, you're going to have an iPad, you're going to have a Kindle, you're going to have an Alexa, you're going to have all of these devices with compute, but they're not being utilized most of the time. Actually, if you look at the numbers, the smartphone is only utilized 21% of the time. If you look at the numbers on a PC, it's less than 9% now. If you look at your Sony PlayStation or your Xbox, it's 10%. So we see this as a huge opportunity to unlock that underutilized compute. We look at a lot of the competitors in this space, not as competitors, but actually as colleagues. Basically, we all see this huge, vast, undertapped, underutilized resource of compute, and we're all trying to do something with that. Some of them, however, have questionable security, so we do get concerned about whether or not they could be exploited. Some of them are very narrow and inflexible. So if you were to look at, for example, Golem, which is one of the most well-known cases, it's very specific in terms of its rendering and in terms of its, its use case. Frankly, that's an amazing thing for that specific vertical, but we see the opportunity as being, we give everyone a Linux container instance that they can do anything with. So we see it as being a much vaster array of, basically the equivalent of infinity different verticals. Another example that we see as being an interesting use case is because we're privacy preserving, we actually, rather than securing every data set, which is very compute intensive, we're actually securing the device's availability and thereby ensuring the privacy. So we also see that we've got some unique factors around privacy. So we have a number of very strategic token purchases, and the reason for that was because we were trying to bootstrap the marketplace from the get-go. In terms of the market liquidity, there's two parts. There's the supply, and so in the supply we had fantastic names like Bitmain, the world's biggest miner. They're currently going for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange IPO at a $30 billion valuation, but they also have huge amounts of GPU that are available that they're interested to run Perlin on. We have F2 Pool, which is one of the biggest mining pools in China and globally. We have Canaan, which is a listed stock exchange miner again. We have Yobi Capital, is a big investor in Shanghai YE, which is another big mining concern. We have Engine Networks, which is 25 million gamers on a network. So this is the example of all of this free cycles, the GPU that we can utilize for the Perlin network. And then on the demand side, we were incredibly picky as well. We were trying to figure out, okay, which investors had an investment portfolio that we could then utilize, so all of the companies within their investment portfolio could also be onboarded into the Pearlin network. So one example, I was just in Israel 2 weeks ago with iAngels. So iAngels is one of the oldest funds, $150 million out of Israel. They had 70 AI companies. We've already met 5 of them. They're very interested in onboarding. Another example is Gen Fund, Danhua. These are all the Chinese funds, and they've got some amazing portfolio companies, Gobi VC. Another example was Global Brain. So Global Brain is a VC that's over 20 years old out of Japan. They have over $1 billion assets under management. They bring 600 investee companies. And so on the demand side, all of these investee companies now want to utilize the free cycles here, and they have a choice. Do they give $1 billion to Jeff Bezos, or do they give $1 billion to potentially 1 billion individuals who are all putting their devices onto the Pearlin network? So we really were very selective when it came to the initial token investors, because we wanted the token purchasers to be strategically adding value to this marketplace. So when it comes to the different levels of tokens and how they purchase the tokens and the different types of terms and conditions, when you're a project owner, you try your very best to try to predict where you want to take the project, and you have to do what is necessary to find the long-term partners. One of the challenges with token liquidity is that, one, it's amazing because you've got this daily liquidity, hourly liquidity, but the challenge is when you run a VC-funded startup, you've got VCs that have like a 7-year outlook, but then when you have token investors, they have maybe a 7-day outlook or 7-hour outlook. So we were trying to figure out, okay, in the middle, how do we make sure that we have the right investors that have the pillars that allow us for this initial test liquidity? And that's what we really targeted from a supply and demand side. And then moving forward, we really looked at, okay, how do we then provide people who can add value to the network an appropriate offering? And so we still have token allocation for people that can strategically add value. If, for example, you are watching this and you are interested in Pearlin and can contribute to the network, if you know companies that have a decent sized monthly cost to AWS or Google Cloud or Ali Cloud, you know, anything north of a few $1,000s per month, we really invite you to be an early adopter, because we're happy to give you discounts as well as free pearls, because we're trying to attract contributive network participants. As a project manager, you're always trying to navigate political uncertainties, economic changes and macro conditions, social adoption, and also technological advances. And so from our perspective, we haven't yet figured out, do we want to go for a public sale because of the regulatory headwinds and the uncertainty? We are thinking and researching an initial exchange offering, because then people can be fully able to trade immediately. They can have full liquidity, and we think that there's huge benefits as well. But like ultimately, coming back to our token holders, we do plan in the next quarter to have liquidity for everyone, but we just want to make sure that we tread the right path.